Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're in Masechtas Avodah Zarah daf Samach Vav. We are going to begin on Samach Vav Omid Aleph, the very top. So we were learning in the Mishnah in yesterday's daf that what happens if you have yain nesach that fell on grapes. So if the grapes are smooth and dry, then all you need to do is just rinse it off and it's fine because nothing absorbed in it. But the problem was that there was cracks in the grapes, then it's also because we're concerned that the yain nesach went into it. And then we also asked when it came to if, let's say, yain nesach fell onto figs or onto dates. So we say if it is nice and tam, if it produces a good taste, then it's aser. And then we ended up bringing a story which we thought was masalistor, but it's really not a contradiction, because in the event that it's nice and tam pagam, then it's mutter. So, and that's basically how we concluded, and we gave another example of something which would be nice and tam pagam, therefore the yain nesach wouldn't aser it. Okay. Says the Gemara. So chamra tika, let's say we're dealing with old wine, and that fell onto grapes. So you had old wine, which is usually of high quality, and because of that, the taste will be recognizable in the grape. So divrei kol b'nais and tam, so everyone's going to hold that because we're dealing with min she'eino mino, these are two separate things, so therefore, it's once we can detect the taste, then it's aser. And the way that the Shulchan Aruch explains, obviously, how you're supposed to know, so you can ask an akum to taste it. In this way, who's an expert, and maybe it's Mesech Hafi Tumos, as the it's brought down over there in your day. Says Rashi, "B'chol heicha the itmar nice and tam in tam and nicker is shir b'shishim." Okay, so the measurement is a 1:60 ratio, or again, the fine way to recognize the taste. So everyone holds that. Now, what happens if we're dealing with chamra dechadata b'invei? Let's say we're dealing with not old wine, but new wine that fell onto grapes. So, ba'yomer b'mashahu. You're going to be aser even the smallest amount. Rabbi omer b'nais and tam. So Rabbi doesn't make any distinction between old or new wine. It's always b'nais and tam. However, Rabbi says when it comes to new wine, it's b'mashahu. So ba'yomer b'mashahu baser taimas linan. We go bust to the taste. So it's the havile min b'minoi, or min b'minu b'mashahu. We know that the only time we say minos and tam is obviously if it's two separate things, and therefore you could taste the difference or not taste the difference. If it's min b'minoi, then you can't discern the taste, and therefore min b'minu is also b'mashahu. So because this new wine doesn't really have a distinct taste beyond other than of a grape, so you can't say that it's b'nais and tam. Rather, it's also b'mashu. B'nais and tam, basar shmaz linan. We go after the name. These are two separate things. So it's not considered to be min b'minoi is not totally on whether or not it has the same taste. It's totally on if they're two separate names. Min she'eino is b'nais and tam. Okay, so it's obviously a very sidestick machlokes. Okay, so let's look at question 10. Yain nesach shenaf al gabi anavim ma dinoi. So as we said, if we're dealing with obviously anavim shleimus, they have to be whole, because if they're cracked, then it's aser. But if they're whole grapes, typically we rinse them off. They're cracked grapes, so this is where it depends. So if they're cracked and it's old wine, then it's b'nais and tam. If it's new wine, then it's a machlokes among Rabbi, whether it's also nice and tam or b'mashahu. Okay, so that's the machlokes. Tanan. Yain nesach shnaf l'gabi anavim b'chulu. So our case is yain nesach fell on grapes. Now, perhaps we're talking about new grapes, and nonetheless, our Mishnah says explicitly what the din is. Right, so my la b'nais and tam. So you would think that it's once it's b'nais and tam, that's when it's aser, and therefore it's a riot to him. Well, b'mashu, maybe our Mishnah is saying that even b'mashu it's going to be aser. So hamid tani seifa zeh klal kol shebehanasei b'nais and tam aser Kol she'ein bo hanasa b'naisan tam mutter. So we end up making a general rule that if the aser item is able to generate and provide a good taste, so therefore it's nice and tam pagam, nice and tam is aser. Nice and tam pagam will be mutter. So mechlal the nice and tam askinan. We're obviously talking about a case where there's nice and tam. Why would we mention this in the seifa? Obviously, we're talking about a case of nice and tam, which is a case of min she'eino minoi, right? So min she'eino mino is b'shishim, so it's not b'mashu. So Abaye, what's Abaye going to say? Who says it's b'mashu? Abaye masnisim b'charmatika b'invei. No, we're talking about new. We're not talking about new grapes. We're talking about old grape, not new wine, but old wine. And old wine, even Abaye holds, of course, it's going to be b'nice and tam. Okay. Now we have chal de chamra v'chal de shichra. Let's say you have wine vinegar, which then itself is aser, v'chal de shichra, and let's say you have this beer vinegar, which is mutter, right? It says Rashi chad de isr chad de heter. Or if you have a chamir de chiti v'chamir de sa'ari, you have leaven wheat and leaven barley. So Abaye oimer b'nais and tam. Also, in this case, it's considered b'nais and tam. Rabbi oimer b'mashu. So why? So it's basically what we said before. Abaye oimer b'nais and tam, baser taimaz linan, v'hai taimulchud, v'hai taimulchud. They have totally different tastes, and therefore we say it's considered min she'eino minoi, and it's only batel b'shishim. V'havi min she'eino minoi is b'nais and tam. However, Rabbi oimer no b'mashu, baser shmoaz linan. Even though it's true that it has different tastes, but has the same name. They're both called vinegar. They're both called leaven. Okay, so how do I know the basar taimaz? How do we know you don't go basar the name, that there's two names or has one name, but rather the taste? Does it produce a different taste? The sanya. Because it says like this, Tavlin, Beis V'Gimel, Shemus, let's say you have these spices, and they have two or three names, Hein Min Echad, but it's the same min. So, for example, if you could have Gimel Shemos, but it's Min Echad. So, example, white pepper, black pepper, king pepper, there's all these different types of peppers. So they all have they have the same min. It's Min Echad because they're all pepper, but they have different names because one's white, one's black, etc. Oh, Min Gimel, or maybe they're three totally separate minim, asurin. So let's say, again, we're talking about these spices. As Rashi says, this is brought to Masechtas Arla. So you have all these different, and it gives the example. Pilpul Lavan, Pilpul Shachar, Pilpul Aruch. I thought I wrote the word long, right? Long peppers. Okay, so that's an example. It says Rashi im nafal kedera. If let's say it fell into a pot, each one itself is not enough to add like spices to the dish. However, since you added a bunch of them, mitzdarfo, mativul v'henshel iser mitzdarfo l'asura. So we say that they're going to be mitzdarf l'isser because if they're connected to an arla tree, so they were usher to use. Okay, so it's mitzdarf. Yomer chizkiah hacham b'minei atika skinan. Here we're talking about these spices that produce some sweetness. As Rashi shikol taimen matukim mishum hachi mitzdarfin de taim shava l'matik behenu kader. The reason why we say it's mitzdarf is, and that's usher, masha, even b'mashahu, is because even though maybe they have different tastes, the reality is that it's not true, because their tastes are the same, because all three of them have the same purpose to sweeten up the dish. So since they're fit to sweeten up the pot, therefore it's why it really has the same time. So iyam b'shalom b'basar taima zlina, and so on. Second, if in fact we go basar taima kulichad taimahu, they all have the same taste, which is why they're mistarful iser. El iyam basar shmaz lina, so hay shmolchad v'hay shmolchad. Why are we mitzdarf them? We say mitzdarf because they all have the same taste, so therefore they're all combined. But if they have different names, If you go Basar Shema, they all have different names. Rabbi Amallah Chamani Rameir, he said to be Hudo Mishim Rameir, he said the name Rameir Medain Lochol Yisurin Shabbatar Shemastar from Sam Zeh. How do we know that Yisurin are combined? Shnemar. Musoichel Kol Toeva, do not eat any abomination. Kol Shetivati Locha, anything which is an abomination to you, Harihu, Babal Taichli, you should not eat. So says Rashi, even according to Rameir, it doesn't make any difference. Even if they have a different taste, even if they have a different name, it's still mitzdarf. Why? Because we just view it as usr, a davar which is usr, and therefore it's like an isser of isser, and that's why they're mitzdarf. Okay, so we don't really have an answer to that question. Now, let's say a vinegar that falls into wine. So, divrei kol b'nais and tam. In that situation, everyone holds it's b'nais and tam. Says Rashi. Why is it that vinegar that falls into wine, it's b'nais and tam? The heter, so he says like this. Chal iser, you have this vinegar which is aser, and it falls into wine of heter. The heter, the heter, everyone says is nice and tam. The chi nafel gava, when the vinegar fell into the wine, lo havidamile, lo berecha, lo betaima. So the taste or the smell isn't the same. Shein hayayin mevatel reach. The wine doesn't have the ability to remove the odor or the aroma of the vinegar until it is like mixed in with a lot of it. But the vinegar cannot be mevatel the smell of the wine because there's so much wine. So in this situation, they don't cancel each other out, because if you have a little bit of vinegar, which is very potent, with a lot of wine, so the smell of the vinegar is still going to be there, but the wine is still going to be there too. So therefore, they are distinct. And therefore, since they have different names, but they also have different tastes, so therefore it's b'nais and tam. However, chamul goichal. What happens if you have forbidden wine that fell into vinegar? Now the aroma changes to right away. So Abaye oimer b'mashu v'Rabbi oimer b'nais and tam. So therefore, this would also be their machlokas. Why? Abaye oimer b'mashu. Why is it that a forbidden wine which falls into potent vinegar, which of heter? So why? Because he says. So Abaye says b'mashu. Why? Mashu means it's like min b'mino. It's like the same thing. Says the Gemara on Samach Zayin. Because reicha chala, even though the wine changed the aroma, caused there to be a change, the time of chamra, but as there's a lot of wine, as it still now it tastes like wine, chala. Therefore, it's still considered like vinegar. He considers that in this case, since the usher wine fell in, and even though it's true that it now has the odor of vinegar, but the taste is still that of wine. And since the wine is usher, and you could make a distinction, and because of that, the taste of it's the taste of wine. So therefore, we say it's a case of min b'mino, and v'chol min b'mino is b'mashu. Says Rashi, Yain zeh samach le'iruvo hayirecha chala v'tayma chamra u'basarecha is linan. Okay. Rabbi oimer b'nais and tam. Why? If you have reicha chala, if the smell, the wine changed the aroma, and v'tayma chamra, but it tastes, even though it smells like vinegar, it tastes like wine, chamra, it's considered to be like wine. So this is a machlokas. If it tastes like wine, but it smells like vinegar, is it vinegar or is it wine? So according to this, as it has the taste of wine, okay. So haibas tia avikachavim b'Yisrael shapridami. So in the event that you have, as Rashi says, a bastia, which is a nekev noikvin b'megefes chavius l'hareach. Let's say you have this opening that's put into a barrel in order for you to be able to smell the wine, to be able to examine whether or not it's good or not. So that's what's called a bastia. So when it comes to this, if it's an Ovid Kachavim and did this, be Yisrael, regarding Yisrael's barrel, Shaper Dami. So the din is, it's mutter. However, Yisrael B'Ovid Kachavim, whatever Yisrael did this to Ovid Kachavim, so Rabbi Omer Aser, Rabbi Omer Mutter, Rabbi Omer Aser Reicha Milsahi. He'll say that because Reicha Milsa, so therefore it's something which is Aser. However, Rabbi Omer Mutter Reicha La Milsahi. So the question is, if you smell something of Isser, so it's not like akin to like tasting it, so that's Shaila of Reicha Milsa. So Amar Rabbi Menamina, how do I know the Reicha Velo Klumhu? That'll tell you that Reach is nothing, as opposed to like actually consuming it. Did not. Tanur Shatsiku Bikamoin. Let's say you have this oven that's heated with kamoin shel truma. So this is some type of a dish. So what happened? V'afal bosa pas, and you baked bread in that oven. So the question is, if you had this kamoin and then you had bread, so what's the status of the bread? So on this, the Gemara says, hapas materis. You could eat the bread. Lafi she'en tam kamoin, el reicha kamoin. Because even though maybe the kamoin is aser, but all the bread has is, let's say, the smell of it, but doesn't have the taste of it. So since it only has the smell but not the taste, so you could eat it. Well, why? If you hold Reicha Milsa, then you shouldn't be able to. So to ride the Reicha Milsa. So V'baya Shani Hasam de Mikla Isure. Over here, the kamoin already was burnt to ashes when the bread was put in. And that's the reason why it's mutter. It's not even here. So if it was here, then maybe we would say Reicha Milsa. But over here, we're not going to say Reicha Milsa in a situation where the Isser basically isn't even here. Fine. Let's look at question 11. Bastia by Omer Aser Reicha Milsi. Ketza meyashav abai l'shitaso. That which it says Tanur shesiku b'kamoin. But it says Vatanan haroi de pas v'nasno pabi chavius. Okay, we didn't complete this yet. All right, so let's keep going. Let's finish the daf first. Okay, so we said it's different because the kamoin is not here. Okay, so with that, the mikli surah. Omer Rav Mori katanoi. Maybe in fact it's a machlokas tanoim. This whole matter. So haroi de pas chama, a person who takes out hot bread. The nasno pichavi shel yain shel truma. He takes this hot bread and he puts it onto the barrel of truma. And the question is, what's the din of the aroma? Is it going to make it usher? So Amer oiseh Rabbi Yehuda matir. Rabbi Yosi matir b'shel chitin. He allows wheat. V'aseh b'shel sa'irin, but not barley. Fi shehas sa'irim shoeves, because barley has a distinct property in that it draws, it absorbs more, and therefore he's more concerned with barley than with wheat. So my law b'hakmivagi. Marsa v'reicha milsihi. One says reicha milsa, and therefore, since he holds the reach has some power, and that's the reason why the bread's also over here, because of its connection to the ayin shel truma. Marsa v'reicha la milsihi. So Rava, according to the sheet of Rava, Vadi Tanohi. By me lema Tanohi, he Shermulach no. Amachabaya lav mi itmar law Merabba Merchana Mari Shlakish. Had I not mentioned to you the following case? The pascham of a chavis psucha. If you have hot bread and the barrel of truma, the wine of truma, is wide open, so that's obviously more problematic because we can do samach zayin. In that case, it's certainly aser, because definitely the reach absorbed into the bread. On the other hand, if we're dealing with cold bread and the barrel's closed, there's nothing to worry about. The whole machlok is megupa or petucha. Either where the bread is hot, However, the barrel is closed, or we're talking about when the bread is cold, but the barrel is open. So it has one property which would maybe aser it, but one which would matter it. V'hadi da nami kapas chama v'chavius ptucha dami. In this case, is comparable to hot bread and an open barrel, and therefore for that reason he asers. Okay, we're going to stop there. Let's look at question 11 and a few more questions as well. Bastia, so we said this. So how do we understand when it says that aser recha milsa? If you hold recha milsa, so how do we understand the case of tanur shasiku b'kamoin, and we say the bread is mutter? So why is it mutter? So by the case of the oven, it's different than miklat isur, because the isur is destroyed. It's not here anymore. So therefore, it's not because recha milsa, it's because the isur is not here. And that which you said, haray de pas and nasal al pichavius shel yain truma, how could it be that he matters? So it depends. If we're dealing with an oven which is, if we're dealing with bread which is cold and the oven is, and the barrel is closed, it's certainly mutter. Or if we're dealing in a case where the barrel is open, the bread is hot, then it's definitely aser. However, haray de pas v'nasal gabi chavius mayri, we're talking about you took the bread and put it on the barrel. All right, b'chavius stuma ubastia kechavius psuchadami. So he says that the case of bastia, which we said again, if you put this hole in the barrel, so in that case, we established the din, and we end up saying here that when we're dealing with a bastia, it's as though it's like the barrel is open, and that's the reason why over there it could have been problematic. However, over here, haray de pas v'nasal pi chavius, so then it is according to Yehuda, he matters it. Okay, let's continue with a couple more questions. Let's look at TA 18. Chalwa de iser shenafel chamra de heter. So you have vinegar of iser, which still has its smell, and that of wine, which is heter, and it falls, what's the din? Or what's the din if the wine is aser and it fell into the vinegar of iser? So in the event that we're talking about the vinegar, which is aser, that fell into the wine, everyone says it's nice and tam, because it's min she'eino mino, because the vinegar still stays, and the wine is separate also. The chalwa that when wine falls onto vinegar, so there's an opinion that says that if the fragrance is going to be, of course, vinegar, but the taste remains wine, so then it's considered to be like wine. So I believe min she'eino mino, they're two separate things. However, the one who says that in this case, if the smell is of vinegar and it tastes like wine, that it has the status of vinegar because we go buster the smell. So then that's min b'mino v'neser b'mashu. The kaidim shnisarv kibul hayayin reach shel chaymetz. Okay. Question Yud Tes. No, we didn't do that. Question TB. Question TB 21. Ma machlokasim efshir. No, we didn't do that yet. Question 20. Tanur shasiku b'kamoin shel truma v'alfa was a pas muteris. Madua inkan isu mishum reicha kamoin shel truma. So either because reicha la milsahi, or it's different over here. It's like it's not here, and because of this, it's like it's sarif b'tanur. It's all burnt up, and therefore it's not an issue. Question TC. 20. So we saw this. This was in yesterday's daf, which is chitim shnaflehim yain nesach ve'ezo oifen hitter rava limchor la'akum. So we ended up saying he allowed it only in a situation where he ground it all up, and then he sold it to the Akim Shlub Ifnei Yisrael. So that was the heter, which is TC 20. Let's see what they wrote over here. Sheyitchanem v'yafem v'yimchum l'Akim Shlub Ifnei Yisrael depas Akum Asura. Possibly TC 21. Tanur Shasika b'Kamoin Shel Truma. Yep, same question. Madua ein kan Isur l'Zarim mishum reach HaKamoin Shel Truma. So as we said, either because Reicha Lav Milsahi. Okay, this was Samach Hayim and Beis, and this is Samach Vavum and Beis. So, and this is TC 21. Or it's because the Kamoin is burnt up, so it's not here. So I say Reicha La Milsa or Mishum de Mikali Isura Adkan.